So, dear friends, today I thought of moving to the second half of Bhikkhu Analayo's book about compassion and emptiness into the contemplation of emptiness. We have already seen a clear connection with the boundless aspect of the meditation on emptiness and the boundless radiation of the four divine abidings. We have seen already how the ethical side of the Brahmavihara practices has got an indirect but a very clear connection with this idea of a boundless practice, in the sense that if there were an unwholesome karma, an unwholesome thought, word, or deed, if the mind is narrow, compressed, and small, if we are small-minded, if we only have a very limited, meager, finite store of merits, then a small, unwholesome deed could have a big impact. But then, if the mind is developed and made great, then the a little limited karma that we have done in the past has not so much impact, like putting a teaspoon of salt in a teacup of water versus putting a teaspoon of salt in the river Ganges, or putting a teaspoon of salt in a boundless infinite space. The Brahmavihara, the divine abidings practices, are definitely like a positive practice, whereas the contemplation of emptiness is like a negative practice. So in that way, those two practices are quite different, but then in another way, they seem to be very complementary. The boundless meditations are really great for making the mind calm, to getting away from reactivity, the kind of reactions that could lead to perpetuation of suffering and reactions and so forth. And then the divine abidings meditations also have that same kind of a calming effect, but it seems that the meditation on boundless space, the boundless qualities, sets the stage to make the divine abidings meditations all the more powerful. So, with that introduction, I'd like to turn to the Cūḷasuññata Sutta, the shorter discourse on emptiness. This is number 121 in the middle-length discourses. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in the still longhouse of Megara's mother in the Eastern monastery. The word that Bhante Sujata translated as a stilt longhouse, they used to translate it as a palace, and the word is pasade. That word is sort of a pun, because pasati is a tranquil confidence or tranquility. Who knows who about the proper name for Megara's mother? Does anybody know? Yes? Do you know why? Lady Visakha, do you know why Lady Visakha is Megara's mother? No. Okay. Lady Visakha was a very powerful woman. She was a laywoman. She was so powerful. When she was married, her husband gave her a jeweled parure. That's a kind of like a vest, and they're covered with jewels. And it was so heavy that it took several strong men to lift it up. But she was able to easily carry it. There are many other stories about the power, intelligence, and wisdom and generosity, the outstanding generosity of Lady Visakha. But her husband was not a Buddhist. She tried to get her husband to agree to invite the bhikkhus to come to receive alms food at the house, but he doesn't agree to it. So, being a diplomat like she is, the way she solved it was she would go out among her friends, the other ladies, and she'd say, well, at our house we eat old food. And then the word got around, and her husband was Megara, heard about this, and he was quite infuriated. And he said, we only have the best food. The food we have is always fresh. How are you saying we eat old food? And she said, well, darling, it's because you are in your wealth and good luck. You're getting the fortune. You're the good result of previous wholesome karmas that you did. You're just consuming the enjoyment of the old karma, but not creating new karma. So with that exchange, she caused him to be converted to Buddhism and becoming a disciple of the Buddha. And so, therefore, he said, even though you're my wife, I say you're my mother in the Dhamma, because you were the leader in leading me to discover the Dhamma. The story setting is kind of interesting because the sutta becomes quite abstract, but it starts in a setting that's completely realistic. In the late afternoon, Venerable Ananda came out of retreat and went to the Buddha. He sat down to one side and said to the Buddha, Sir, this one time the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans, where they had a town named Townsville. This is also Bhante Sujata's humor. The name of the town is called Nigama, Nigarakang, which does mean a town. So this town is the essence of town. This also becomes important. There I heard and learned this in the presence of the Buddha. Ananda, these days I usually practice the meditation on emptiness. Suññata is emptiness. This is an important word that is much emphasized in the Mahayana, but it's also important in the Theravada. And then vihara is dwelling, so dwelling in emptiness. So dwelling in emptiness is called meditation on emptiness. I trust I properly heard, learned, and applied the mind and remembered this from the Buddha. Indeed, Ananda, you properly heard, learned, and applied the mind and remembered that. Now, as before, I usually practice the meditation on emptiness. Now, consider this stilt longhouse of Megara's mother. Now this building was donated to the Sangha. How it was donated? Do you know that story? Well, Lady Visakha went to visit the Buddha, to visit the Sangha, to hear a Dhamma talk. And while she was there, she thought it would not be suitable to listen to a Dhamma talk while wearing this jeweled parure, this jeweled vest. So she took it off and gave it to her attendant, her servant. And then they listened to the Dhamma talk, and the servant left it behind there in the monastery. It is, I'm trying to remember which bhikkhu found it. Maybe it was Sariputta. Do you know which bhikkhu found it? One of the bhikkhus found it. It's against the rule for a monk to touch money or to touch silver and gold and jewels, but the Buddha made an exception. If we find that money or silver and gold and jewels has been left behind in the monastery, we may touch it to pick it up and put it in a safe place so the owner can retrieve it. So the bhikkhu put it in a safe place, and then later Lady Visakha came back and to retrieve it. And then she found that this parure had been touched by the Venerable Bhikkhu. And she said, well, it's been touched by the Bhikkhu, I can't take it back. So then to solve the problem, she agreed to buy it back. So she bought this jeweled parure back, and then the wealth was enough to build this monastery. So here's a monastery. The monastery is empty of elephants, cows, horses, and mares, of gold and silver, and of gatherings of men and women. There is only this that is not emptiness, namely the oneness dependent on the mendicant Sangha. So the Sangha of bhikkhus, in this case, they all are practicing in the same way. They all are wearing the same kind of robe. They all are practicing restraint. They all are practicing the same sila. They all are observing noble silence, except during those times when they're speaking about the Dhamma. And so, in that way, the monastery is quite a bit different than the village. How many have spent time living in a monastery? Yeah. And perhaps if you haven't lived in a monastery, perhaps you've stayed at a retreat center while taking a retreat and experienced the emptiness of racket and noise and activity and diversity while you're at the monastery. So what the pattern that he's setting here is that we're training the mind to be aware of what is not there. Just the same way in practicing meditation, I sometimes suggest to examine the mind and see whether the hindrances or the other defilements of the mind are present. And then you may notice that some or all of the hindrances are not present at any particular time. And then if you notice that the mind is free of those hindrances, you notice the absence of those hindrances. And that rejoicing from that helps you to enter into meditation. And so the same way, being free from the pressure of the racket of the village, one can focus on the sort of simplicity of the mendicant Sangha. And then he continues, in the same way, a mendicant, ignoring the perception of the village and the perception of people, focuses on the oneness dependent on the perception of wilderness. So who has spent time alone in the forest, and it's quite different than being around people. In fact, it's one of the great discoveries that you can make if you have periods of actual solitude, not having contact with other human beings for a period of time. You could notice to some extent the mind is always responding and interacting with the other people who are around. Even if they're very quiet and tranquil and unified like the Sangha, then in that case the mind is responding to the psychological unity of the Sangha. And so there's a way that, there's a way in meditation, somebody who's a student could become mindful of the teacher. So you would be paying attention to whether the teacher is standing, walking, sitting, or lying down. You would be paying attention to the teacher and how the teacher is reaching, lifting, placing, picking up, eating, the different things that the teacher is doing. And in so doing, if the teacher is very mindful and calm and practicing yoniso manasikara, just by watching another person who's got that kind of psychology, it helps you to pick up a similar psychology for yourself. And then it's possible to extend the external awareness when you're in a Sangha and be aware of all of the others in the room. So then if the mindfulness is extended in that way, that you encompass the minds of the other people with your own mind. And then if there's others in the room who are free of the hindrances, you could be aware of that. If there's other people in the room who are having some kind of emotion or some kind of thought, you be aware of that. And so that sensitivity is very beneficial in a way for practice of kindness and mindfulness. But then it's a completely different practice when you seclude yourself from being around other people and be in wilderness. So, in the same way, a mendicant, ignoring the perception of the village and the perception of people, focuses on the oneness dependent on the perception of wilderness. The mind leaps forth, pakandati, so it's not just that the mind is in a sluggish kind of way, like connecting with an object of meditation. It's much more active than that. The mind jumps to the object. The mind gains confidence. Placidity, which is, we can always, those who live around here in California all know Ajahn Pasano at the Abhayagiri Monastery. So his name is related to this placidity, this confidence, this tranquil confidence, or this bright, tranquil confidence. And he exemplifies that himself. The mind settles down. This is santitati. So citta is to stand. So the mind is able to come to stability. And then the mind becomes decided. This is adimucchati, which it's a very interesting word because adimucchati has a connection to like making a resolution or making a determination or making a connection. But the root of the word munchati means a release or freedom. So this word itself is a kind of a puzzle. There are many other suttas that have the same sequence: pakandati, pasidati, santitati, vimucchati. And in those other suttas, pakandati, santitati, vimucchati means it goes to release. I'm not saying that in this case that they made a mistake. Ajahn Brahm says they made a mistake, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. But you could say they become released in the perception of wilderness, or they become decided, connected in that perception of wilderness. They understand there's no stress due to the perception of village or the perception of people. And here, the word that's called stress or disturbance is dharata, which has got a root meaning that includes fear. So fear or anxiety or disturbance. This is something that I personally identify with quite a lot because as I get older, I'm more and more aware of how much anxiety or disturbance there can be in having to associate with humans. it's really troublesome having to relate to humans. Whether they be a lot of humans or just one or two humans, it can be quite a lot of disturbance to the mind, having to cope with talking to humans or being around humans, associating with humans. And then to be able to have a place that one can go to, a place in meditation where one is able to fully withdraw from being engaged and involved in worrying about the people, is truly relaxing, truly blissful, truly a release. I think it could be that there are some personality types in the world who get energy from social contact, and they may feel stressed out and kind of difficult if they have to be alone, and then they feel comfortable and happy when they get to be around people. In my family, my father was tended to be anxious towards people. That's probably where I got it from. In his work, he needed to supervise a large number of people, and night after night, he would come home and he would sort of fret and worry about what he needed to do to keep his employees happy, to keep them productive and happy, and to overcome whatever these were creative people. He was in a creative business, and all these artists or these creative people all had their neurotic problems. And my father was trying to figure out how he could, kind of coax them along so they could get the jobs done. And so there's stress about having people in the mind, always this constant meeting in the mind. So being able to depart from that and have seclusion from that is no stress, no anxiety. There's no anxiety left because of the perception of the village with all its noise and diversity, and the people with all of their psychological issues. Only this small amount of, I don't really like stress, only this small disturbance, namely of the oneness depending on the perception of wilderness. So this pattern is going to be repeating again and again as we go through this sutta. That's why it's good to understand that emptiness is not being developed as sort of just an abstract concept, but it's the idea of that the mind is empty of something. So something is taken away. And one is aware of that thing which is taken away, are aware of the absence of the thing which is taken away. I'm particularly also interested in the use of reference to oneness, ekatanchi. Eka is one, ekata is oneness. And so in many places when they talk about developing samatha, they talk about the mind moving away from diversity and towards oneness. In the jhana formula, the unification of the mind is often described in terms of the different aspects of mentality being settled and pulled together onto one focus or one theme of meditation without being distracted. So instead of multitasking, the mind is unitasking, only doing one thing. In this case, it seems to almost be more like a pure simplicity. So you're not looking at the wilderness. I know, like Chintana is a professional in the outdoors wilderness area, and you probably know all the different species of trees and species of plants and the species of the birds and the species of mushrooms and the different species of things that you might encounter while you're giving a guided tour of in the wilderness. And that would be like approaching the wilderness with a very diverse, multiplied, complicated mind, seeing like many different things in the wilderness. But this approach, like the oneness of the oneness, is just seeing the wilderness as a whole, seeing it in a simplified way. It's for this reason that I believe that in the sutta they are talking again and again about perception. So a perception is like what the mind, how the mind actually constructs the recognition of the object that's being experienced. It's going to come along later. Perception sometimes has to do with setting a boundary around something. So if this is the cup, and you see the shape of the cup by seeing the edges of the cup. And when you know the boundary, like this is the cup and the other things are not the cup, that's what perception does. It creates a cohesive, a unified whole out of something that's created with boundaries. But through the process of the sutta, even that's going to be deconstructed. But for the purpose of this, if you take the perception of the wilderness, not all the little things in the wilderness, but just the wilderness as a whole. This is the wilderness, and take that perception, then it's a simple whole that one perceives. So this field of perception empty of the perception of village, perception of people. Only this remains that is not emptiness, the oneness depending on the perception of wilderness. They regard it as empty of what is not there. But as to what remains, they understand that it is present. I want to pause here for a second, see if there are questions so far. 7 new messages, okay. Okay, 2 weeks in a monastery, 30, 60 days in a monastery. Adimuchati, it means to be determined, or to be settled, or to be resolved. But the root meaning, muchati, means to be released, to be free. So somehow this word, there's a kind of a conundrum within this word. It means to be settled and resolved, but it also means to be free. So it's kind of like a poetry, that's the double meaning. Madeline increasingly prefers the life of solitude. Yes, me too. Adimuchati is decided on something, intent on something, result on something. Yes. Other comments so far? So you've got the method. So let's see where we can take this in the sutta. That's how emptiness manifests in them, genuine, undistorted, and pure. Oh, Chintana, you had a question.
Does the expression seeing the forest through the trees have anything to do with what you're talking about?
Yes. So you only see the trees, but you don't see the forest. Yeah. Furthermore, a mendicant, ignoring the perception of people and the perception of wilderness, focuses on the oneness dependent on the perception of earth. It doesn't say earth element, but this could be considered in terms of the earth, which is the ground where the forest is, or it could be in terms of materiality, like an aspect of the earth element. Richard?
Thank you, Raya. This vimucchati, I was just trying to find the word. Adimucchati. I think it's sort of like a liking and fulfillment. Like one gets to like living in the monastery. Like you were saying earlier, it's peaceful and quiet in many ways, right? And compared to all the hustle and bustle of the town. And then when one goes off to the wilderness, it might be a little frightening at first. Like there's a sutta where Buddha is asked, wouldn't person might lose their mind or something going and living, alone out in the jungle, out in the forest? And Buddha said, yes, I myself, when I first went out there, I had a lot of fear and difficulties and everything. And he talks about a lot of different technique. Eventually he developed this technique that if he became afraid, whatever he was doing, he would just keep doing that. He wouldn't let it change his mind to do something else, like to react to the fear, so to speak. But, and I think this gets misunderstood, he doesn't say he overcame the fear that way. He says when he became enlightened, now the forest has no fear or anything for him. It's very enjoyable and everything. So the quiet and peace and everything. So this thing, I think it kind of means like you come to like an appreciation of it. Oh, this is really great. Now I'm away from all the hustle and bustle. It's so peaceful out here, and you lose that fear after a while. The other thing I wanted to point out is this. Trying to find the word. The ekatan.
Yes.
Now, ek means one, and atan, when you click on that word, it turns to atam, like with an M with a dot under it, which is like a possessive. So I think when they're using that word in this sense, oneness, right? They're saying oneness. It's more like one's own self gets this liking. You know what I mean? It's not dependent on something else. It's like one's own self, right? Atta, and atam kind of means that oneself, right? Eka. So kind of like alone. Alone, one gets this liking, for oneself. It's a little complicated for me to explain the idea. I'm not sure if it's coming through, but it's sort of like that. And then the other point is about dependent on the perception of earth. When we get past this section to the next section, it goes into formlessness. So what they're talking about here is the person has sat down to do meditation, and you don't find anywhere in the sutra anything about closed eye meditation. I'm not against it. People can do it if they want. I do both, open eye, closed eye, because I was a Zen student. We did open eye, but then at Theravada, I got used to doing closed eye because that's what people were teaching me. But it just means you're sitting down and your eyes are falling just on the earth. They're not looking past to the forest or anything. You've brought your mind down, you brought it in, to this thing. So you're sitting down for meditation, just on the earth in front of you. It later, because they couldn't understand what was being talked about, they developed this whole idea of earth kasina and everything. You're doing an earth kasina meditation, which allowed you to go to formlessness. No, that's not what it's talking about at all. And there's a reason why it jumps, which I'll get into later. I don't want to, if there's time, I don't want to mention it right now, but there's a reason why it does go from this. You're sitting down to meditate, your eyes are falling on the earth, you're not being distracted by anything, and then goes to formlessness. It has to do with the sutta is about going into emptiness. So the next level of emptiness at this level, right, is empty of your own body. Other than that, there's no real emptiness. Okay, so when the body drops off, then you're in the
Right.
formless.
Yep, this is where we're headed.
Okay, well, thank you for listening.
I am going to not quite agree with you about ekata, because the ta ending makes an adjective into a noun, like shunya means empty, shuññata means emptiness, eka means one, ekata
You know
means
what? That T at
oneness.
the end, right? But the T at the end is it just means it's the end of the quote. If you notice, that's a section in quotes. So that's whenever you have a quote in Pali, it's always ended with T because they didn't have periods and things like the original Pali.
No, that's
we
not.
do. So they use the T to end it. You can see it's clearly there to find. Anyway, I don't want to argue or anything, but I'm just saying that's why I discount the T, because it's just the end of the quote. And then below, he starts another quote after that. And you can see the same structure again. Anyway, but that's my view. But thank you very much.
Well, it is. We'll just go on. We'll just set that to the side because otherwise we'll have a grammar class. Now, this perception of earth, there's an example that's given here, and this is about looking at it, seeing the earth, like seeing the forest for the trees. So the mind leaps forth, gains confidence, settles down, becomes decided in that perception of earth. As a bull's hide is rid of folds when fully stretched out by 100 pegs, so too, ignoring the hilly terrain, the inaccessible riverlands, the stumps and thorns, the rugged mountains, they focus on the oneness dependent on the perception of earth. So, this is actually moving towards just the materiality of the material world in its simplest way, and we're just about to jump away from the material world into the domain of the mental. Seeing you could say, if I were doing this practice, if there's a hilly terrain, it's just the earth element. If there's a lowland or a gorge or a gully, it's just the earth element. The stumps and thorns are just the earth element. The rugged mountains, just the earth element. And you look at all the different kinds of diversity, and you see what it all has in common is like one quality, the quality of earthiness, of materiality, the earth element. And keep sort of like, the mind is sort of like moving back and forth between experiencing diversity and experiencing the unity until the diversity sort of like falls off the table, and the only thing that's left is the unity. Their mind leaps forth, gains confidence, settles down, becomes decided in that perception of earth. They understand here's no stress or no disturbance due to the perception of people or perception of wilderness, only this modicum of stress, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of earth. They understand this field is empty of the perception of people and wilderness. There is only this that is not emptiness, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of earth. Ekatanti. In that case it's a quotation. So it's ekata, ekatang, ti. Further up here, there's just ekatang without the ti, which is oneness. So they experience that being empty of what is not there. As to what remains, they understand that it is present. So this is like yatha bhuta jnana dasanam, seeing reality as it really is. So when looking in this way, it's not that you're having a deep understanding about the nature of earth. You're having the deeper understanding about the nature of the perception. So when this is the perception, then that other perception is not there, and the one perception of the earth element is there. So you understand at the same time what is not present and what is present. And what you experience as being present is more and more subtle. The mind leaps forth, gains confidence, settles down, becomes decided in the perception. Okay, so, I'm sorry, I skipped. That's how emptiness manifests in them, genuine, undistorted, and pure. Then furthermore, a mendicant, ignoring the perception of wilderness and the perception of earth, focus on the oneness dependent on the perception of the dimension of infinite space. The dimension of infinite space is a very interesting word. Akasa means space or the firmament, the sky above. Anan is not anta, which is without a boundary, without a limit. So an anta is a limit. So the space without a limit, and then the ayatana is the dimension, and then the sanya is the perception. So perceiving the space without a boundary. In what the mind naturally does in perception, it creates borders and boundaries around things in order to define them. Even, I was listening to Ajahn Brahm. He used to be a scientist, And he said that the method of modern science is that in order to control nature, they have to learn how to measure nature. When they're able to measure nature with their scientific instruments, then they can get control of it. Just the same way, if the government wants to control you, they would like to measure you. So they want to know your name, your age, your entire history, your genetics, your ID, and where you came from, and what your citizenship is, and who your parents are, and all these things, and what money you earned, all of these things they want to know about you, what your associates are, what you did, what you do in your social media, all these things they want to know them about you because they want to pin you down and put you into a slot in order to control you. So the mind also has that tendency. The whole perception tendency is sort of like a way of like controlling our experience by putting things into their boxes. But then this space without a boundary is like blowing wide open that aspect of perception, which is creating bounded perceptions. Something else that's interesting here is that very often in the process of meditation, after the before coming to the meditation on infinite space, one would have developed the four jhanas. One would experience the mind being free from the hindrances, experience the unification of mind, the bliss of seclusion from the hindrances and defiled states of mind, the bliss of freedom from the thinking discursive thought process, and the tranquility of body and mind, and then how the observing how the feeling tone is ever more calm, moving from bliss towards neutral experience with the increasing levels of sati and increasing equanimity. So equanimity and sati become more and more prominent as the bliss or the activity subsides, and then from that it goes over towards the immaterial meditations in the standard list. But here it's really just almost like inviting us, don't be such a workaholic about your meditation to think you've got to go through step by step, accomplish this, tick this off your list that you've done this one, then you can go on and do the next one, and give yourself a score as to whether you've gotten to this level or to the next level. But rather that it could be that simply resting in this quiet, relaxed, peaceful, and unified meditation in the wilderness, that this boundlessness of the space element, perception of the space element, can open up. This is something that Analayo kind of emphasizes. He notices that a lot of the Western students are uptight about jhana practice because they are not able to enter into jhana whenever they want to, or not able to enter into jhana at all. And so then they start to criticize themselves and over effort themselves in a stressful way, and the more they stress out about meditation, the further away they get from what they're aiming for. So this is why Analayo emphasizes that the practice of the Brahma Viharas is a much more relaxing, easeful, pleasant, and in a certain way natural meditation that can open to samatha, or open to the tranquil meditation in a way that's is protecting one against being too uptight or stressful about meditation itself. So this is almost like a different way, and to me it is completely natural to live in the wilderness after experiencing the earth, to look up and to see the firmament above and have the mind go to the perception of boundless space. And at that point in the meditation, the perception of earth is gone, and that also means like perception of the body, perception of the, like in the nama rupa, there's like mentality and materiality. So the materiality, like that side of the equation, is no longer what we're paying attention to, and instead we are in the realm of mentality, in this dimension of infinite space. Okay, there are other suttas in which they, like the Dattavibhanga Sutta and many others, very often you see the four elements of the materiality is defined in terms of four elements, and they have the mind go through the four elements, and then it jumps to the fifth of the elements is the space element. And so that's another way that this bridge happens, and it's very natural. So then there's no disturbance or no fear or no stress, no affliction connected to the perception of wilderness or of earth. Only this modicum of disturbance, of stress, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of the dimension of infinite space. So to my impression is that the disturbing aspect of infinite space, well, I suppose somebody could find infinite space to be disturbing. You might feel a little like lost or scared because there's no boundary. And then you'll see in the next step that even in the perception of boundless space, there's still a little bit of a boundary left. So there's only this that is not emptiness, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of the dimension of infinite space. They regard that as empty of what's not there, but as to what remains, they understand that it is present. And that's how emptiness manifests in them, genuine, undistorted, and pure. So what's remaining is boundless space and perception, right? Then ignoring perception of earth, ignoring the dimension of infinite space, he focuses on the oneness dependent on the perception of the dimension of infinite, or you could say boundless, consciousness. So this consciousness is vijnana. And we know, if we've been studying about the 5 aggregates, or if we've been studying about the 6 sense bases, that vijnana, our consciousness, our cognition, I know Richard uses cognizing, and I think that's also a very good translation, that cognizing is depending on the triple conjunction of the sense with the sense object, and the adverting vijnana, which is capable of knowing. Those 3 comes together, and then there's an experience. So this knowing factor is like capable of cognizing a moment of a contact of with the sense faculty internally and the sense object outside. And so in that case, each little moment of vijnana is actually bounded, because it's bounded by the particular instant of the contact through that sense faculty. Or in another way, you could say that we very often experience a vijnana, which is a bounded vijnana, a bounded cognizing, in terms of the 5 aggregates, when there are form, feeling, perceptions, and volitional formations, which are all affected by craving. And then the knowing faculty, which is also affected by craving, which is grasping onto these other aspects of our experience and putting an identity on it, and actually then creating a self out of those experiences. That's another kind of a vijnana, which is bounded, tied up with suffering. But here, what's being pointed to is something else altogether, which is vijnana without a boundary, a vijnana without a limit. So the space, when we cognize space without any limit, then it's a cognizing or a knowing faculty. It's like the object. So a limitless space is cognized by a limitless cognition, and then forget about the space and just notice the mind. Very pure, huh? And also, the way it's presented here is seems to me to be very naturalistic. If somebody has heard of the immaterial meditation and you think, oh, I can never do this, I wouldn't even have a clue how to go about it. Here you've got a clue. Go to the wilderness and be secluded and focus on earth element, and then leave the earth behind and focus on the boundless space above you. And this leads you very naturally into the potential, the possibility of coming to this boundless consciousness. They understand there's no stress or no disturbance due to the perception of earth or the perception of infinite space. Only this modicum, only a little bit of disturbance, namely the oneness dependent on the perception of the dimension of infinite consciousness. And so here, where I believe the disturbance is happening is in this word, perception. Because it's a perception, there's still, it's like, even though it's boundless, it's still putting some kind of a frame on it. They understand it's empty of perception of earth, empty of perception of the dimension of infinite space. There's only this little stress related to the oneness dependent on boundless consciousness. I like boundless better than infinite. And when it's boundless consciousness, then it's also got a very direct limit connected to the boundless radiation of the divine abidings, which is the practice we've been doing. So those two kinds of things support each other. If you practice, even if you haven't like directly realized with your mind in deep meditation what the experience of what is boundless or without a limit, even if it's even like a little bit intellectual, that you are thinking, let my compassion be boundless in every direction without any limit. And until you've like actually realized it, those might be like only words or only thoughts, but nevertheless, what you pay attention to becomes the inclination of the heart, and it's by paying attention to that idea that one's awareness is aimed in that way, and then it's possible for the direct experience of this boundless practice to open up and manifest. Okay, Richard again.
Thank you, Raya. You might notice in some of these lines, down a little bit, it was up before, but I can see it on the screen here, near the bottom. Manasi karoti, right?
Yes.
So what it's saying is that your mana is making this up. Your tendency towards mana, right? That's what's making this happen. And I think that's where the idea of stress comes in, because you're doing this, you're maintaining this. And that's one of the things Buddha talks about, that when you see the jhanas and the Brahma Viharas and all the formless levels are all by your own making, right? They're not, even those are not substantial, they're just made up by your own mind. He says then you can either become a non-returner or reach arahantship, if you take it far enough, that understanding. But that's what it keeps saying here. Manasi karoti, manasi karoti. It's saying, yeah, you're making all this up. You're doing this yourself. You're making these states. It's not like some magic or some being or something is like, or God or something is creating these things for you. No, you're doing it with your own mind. Anyways, that's the point I want to make. Thank you for listening.
We hear in many places the expression yoni so manasi karoti, which is sometimes translated as wise reflection, or giving attention to the origination of things, directing the mind in a wise way. That's particularly in terms of seeing causation. So manasikkaroti is a little bit related to the enlightenment factor of investigation. And indeed, investigation is an activating side of the practice. And because of that activation, there is a certain amount of disturbance left there. So yeah, that's a very good observation. So I would say paticca manasikkaroti. This is paticca is depending. So depending on this dimension, there's the focus of the mind on the oneness. So from infinite consciousness, furthermore, they give up those dimensions: infinite space, perception, infinite consciousness, and then they focus on nothingness. So this will be true emptiness. I've heard this described as no thingness. So the mind is no longer fabricating separate things. So it's another way that this meditating in this way is taking one away from boundaries and putting our experience in little boxes, and instead the nothingness that's very close to contemplating cessation. When we contemplate nirodha, or cessation, we're contemplating the cessation of what? The cessation of dukkha, the cessation of craving, the cessation of the roots of the defilements, and so forth. And so after those, all those unwholesome tendencies have ceased, then what's left behind is emptiness. The mind leaps forth, gains confidence, settles down, becomes decided in that perception of the dimension of nothingness. They understand to what extent there is no stress or no disturbance, and they understand that there's still this little modicum of stress depending on the dimension of nothingness. Then they give that up. So I should have read a little bit more. In this realm of nothingness, they regard it as empty of what is not there, but as to what remains, they understand it is present. So emptiness is not absolute emptiness. It's empty of this, this, and this, but then there's something else remaining, a remainder which is still present. This is how emptiness manifests in them. Genuine, undistorted, yata bhuta, that's what I said before, yata bhuta, seeing it like it is. Avilata, avipalata, that's the palaces, the distortions. That's the delusions where you see something unpleasant as being pleasant, you see something impermanent as being permanent and so forth like that. Those are the distortions. No distortions. It has the purity. It has no distortions. It's seeing things as they really are. Yata Bhuta, like it is. You see it like it is. Then, ignoring that, you come to this further focusing of oneness depending on the perception of the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. And this is difficult to explain to one who has not experienced it, but when one has experienced it, words are so inadequate to point out what's really going on here. But this whole extent to which the perception process is a kind of a fabrication, which is forming concepts in the mind that's got a certain quality of a bounded aspect, so that fabrication process, as I understand it, is what goes away here. The mind leaps forth, gains confidence, settles down, becomes decided in that perception of the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. They understand there's no disturbance due to the other dimensions that have been left behind. Only this little disturbance depending on this dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. They understand that this field is empty of what it's empty of. All the other perceptions are gone, disappeared. It's empty of those. Only this that's not emptiness, namely the oneness, dependent on perception of the dimension nor non-perception. So it's the same pattern. Now we're going to come up to a shift in the pattern. Ignoring that dimension of all these previous dimensions, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception, then they focus on the signless immersion of the heart. Animitang ceto samadhi. There's another phrase you might hear about called animitang ceto vimutti, a liberation, a signless liberation of the heart. So what this means is that the mind is not grasping after any particular qualities or signs of anything that comes into experience. So then there's a complete giving up of preferences that would cause the mind to be attracted to this object or that object based on the qualities or the features, meaning the signs of that object. It's interesting that Bhante Sujato translates chitta as mind, and he translates ceto as being related to the heart. We know that in the ancient times there was not the same idea about where knowing happens or where experience happens. There wasn't really the concept that the knowing activity happens in the brain. So not exactly sure that they literally felt that the knowing faculty is lodged in the heart, but there's a certain way that the intuitive direct experience can be something that's experienced like viscerally, the way the body like responds to things that are experienced as being pleasant, unpleasant, and so forth. And those visceral responses then might be a few nanoseconds later perceived by the brain. And so the brain is sort of like putting together what is the information that's coming up from the body, or you could say coming from the heart. So there's kind of like heart, this way of knowing through the heart. Or some people experience it as being what they know through the belly. So there's a lot of nerves in the belly. A lot of information about what's going on and what it means to us is happening in the belly. But something is coming up from the response of the body to phenomena, and that's combined with a perception. So this Chaito Samadhi to me has to mean that the visceral reactivity to things has become tranquilized. That's samadhi. So so there's signless stillness of the Chaitas. Chaita is also connected to intention, Chaitana, or intention. So it also means that the intention, this is what the Kama, the factory of Kama, the factory that we have within us, which is continuously creating Kamas, which will lead us to keep going around on this merry-go-round, around on the round of rebirth and the round on the different cycles, emotional cycles of our life. So the Chaitana also has become calmed. So the heart is calmed, the intentions are calmed, the mind is calmed, and there's no grasping after signs. This is a very wonderful state, and I know that Arahants love to hang out here, and the Buddha himself frequently practiced this meditation. So after he's fully attained Sammasambuddha, he still would practice this meditation for a pleasant abiding. I'll call on Richard again.
Thank you, Ed. So I disagree with the translation. I know I've read it before of chitta. Chitta means state of mind, and chaita means mind, and chaito is a possessive, one's own mind. Now, this animita, chaito samadhi, this is the cessation. Because the way he describes it, right, you don't have any more down below of perception of the dimension of nothingness, perception of the dimension of neither perception or non-perception. So you've entered into cessation of, I prefer to translate it as sense perception. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this book. It's kind of the story of the Venerable Acharya Mahaboa, and he, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, And he was able to enter into this state, and he described it to his disciples when he first started entering into it, is that he would see like ripples. It would be completely undisturbed, but then occasionally these ripples would start. And he eventually realized that that was the sankharas. These were kind of like the initial awakening, you might say, of a sankhara trying to come up and appear. But because he was in this state, he wasn't able to like completely manifest. So he would just see it as like ripples in his mind, like a ripple, it's a very slight ripple in the stillness. And then as he came out of the state, then the sankhara would come out again. And he would see that these ripples would then evolve into sankharas. So I thought that might be kind of an interesting thing for people to think about. Anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I would like to refer to the footnote about this. This is according to Bhikkhu Sujata. The defining characteristic of the silent immersion of the heart is that the consciousness does not follow after the signs. Explained elsewhere, is not being distracted or affected by the features of sense impressions, as the signs are created by greed, hate, and delusion. By itself, however, it does not necessarily indicate that one is awakened, as good conduct is still required for progress. This was practiced by Moggallana before awakening, who had to be urged not to follow any signs. It may also be used to describe the meditation of an arahant. In that state, it says there's no stress due to these other perceptions about nothingness and the dimension of neither perception or non-perception. Only this modicum of stress, this little disturbance, namely that related to the 6 sense fields dependent on this body and conditioned by life. So I believe this is saying that certainly awareness is present. The mind is fully mindful, completely bright aware, not in a state of unconsciousness or being in a blackout. To the extent that the life process is still happening, then there's that little bit of stress. They understand what it's empty of. They understand that there's only this remaining that's not emptiness, that related to the 6th sense field, dependent on the body, conditioned by life. The Buddha used this meditation to ease the pains of old age. It doesn't mean that he was taking a sedative, but that he was able to see through the pain in the body and to function normally. Richard? I hope you might comment on this sentence here.
So this conditioned by life, if you see the word there, jivata pachaya,
Yep. Yes.
Jivi, it's actually jiva ita pachaya. So jiva means life force. And this is what Buddha says he gave up when he decided to leave the world in Sutta 16 in the Dignikaya. So this is also the word that's translated normally into soul, and it's related to the Greek idea of soul, which is the same thing, life force. And so throughout history, many of the different philosophical schools were trying to figure out what is the life force, just like scientists today. How did life begin? They're looking for that initial life force. And so different schools would come up with different ideas. Well, maybe earth is the main thing in life force, or maybe water is the main thing, right? Or fire is the main thing. So these different philosophical schools are maybe combinations of them. So they're trying to look for this soul, for this life force. So what I think is being said here is you still have a body. Subconsciously, you know, there's still a body, even though you're in this completely bodiless realm, right? You still know that you have a body. And I think Buddha's making this point because Mahavir, if people know the philosophy of the Jains, other than the Tatankaras who become enlightened and still in a body and still maintain a body, the highest practice Mahavir and the Jains say to do is to starve oneself to death. So if one starves oneself to death, at that point, one has cut off all that bad old karma, and that allows them to go to the highest level. But what Buddha is saying here is, no, you can attain the highest level and still be a physically, embodied being until that life force, that jiva, you either let it go like the Buddha did in old age, or you have an accident or sickness or something interferes with it and cuts off the life force. Okay, but the life force is not the self, and that's an error. There's even schools where they call it jivatma, right? Because they're thinking that the life force is the jiva, is the self, like that. Anyways, I thought that might be some interesting information. Thank you for listening.
I realize that we've come to our time and gone slightly over our time. I would like to, even though there's not that much left in the sutta, I'd like to come back to the sutta again next week. There's plenty to reflect about. And even if you would like to do your homework, you may go outside and look at the firmament of the sky and think of the boundless meditation, meditation without any limits, and see what can happen for you in developing this meditation. If you could take a week trying to see to what extent you could notice what is not present. Any given moment of time, what is not present. Could be like certain states of mind are present and other states of mind are not present. Certain aspects of reality are present to what you can perceive, and other aspects of reality are not present. It could be that distorted thinking is present and true thinking is not present, or vice versa. That seeing things as they are is present, and that distorted thinking is not present. So see if it's possible in your cushion time, and as you reflect and ponder going through the day, to try to see what could be done with this habit of the mind of perceiving what's not present. That's the emptiness. And with that thought, I'll see you next week. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamman Namasami Subhatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami.
Thank you, Aya.
Okay, thank you for your kind remarks and your patient listening today, and for your good efforts in meditation.
Oh, sadhu.